And I am officially recording, so thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our Friday webinar called What We Learned. Our goal today is to capture a bit of what we learned during the morning sessions of TOPPS this week. We're not going to cover the afternoon sessions because a lot of us chose one and didn't go to other ones. We are asking the speakers, though, to share their resources with us, and we're building a TOPPS resource page on the UTLC website so that if you didn't get to go to a session, you can look at their resources and see what you missed. So I'm going to share in the chat a link to a Google document, and this document will allow everyone to edit. So our goal here today, and Jane Harris has so willingly agreed to co-present with me, so thank you, Jane. We are going to present this document, and this is kind of a summary of what we learned those first 3 days. And I invite you to please add your thoughts because I feel like I was so busy during the sessions that I wanted to hear what I missed. And everyone processes information differently. So as you share your information, it gives us more to think about. So I've divided this document into 3 parts. So there's the Monday faculty and student panels. And then Tuesday was this on attention and memory. And then the Wednesday was focused on motivation and thinking. And I promise you will not spend an entire hour listening to me speak because Jane Harris is here with me. She's the ITC for HHS. And I want to hear from all of you as well because, again, I'm sure we all glean different things from that. So I promise not to make you seasick and keep scrolling. So before I get started, are there any questions? I'm just going to pop in and see. Richard's here. Good to see you, Richard. So again, some of us were not able to come every day, so this gives us an opportunity to kind of share what we learned those days that we weren't able to attend. And then if you were able to attend, just kind of see how people are processing the information that you heard as well. Before I forget, I've got some reminders here at the top. So we are doing a follow-up to TOPPS on August the 10th from 2 to 4. Go ahead and put that on your calendar if you would, so we can kind of come together and kind of talk about, after we've had several months to kind of process what we heard, what we're thinking about, and what problems we're facing, maybe we can help you solve them. And then in the fall, we're starting several literary circles for faculty, and we're going to focus on Minds Online for one of them. So if you want to continue this conversation that Michelle started here at UNCG, feel free to use that link to sign up for her literary circle or others. And then as we develop our TOPPS resource, we're developing a web page that's going to share all the resources that were shared this week. I will share that here at the top of the document so that you can see that. So I'll start the conversation about Monday. I'm going to start really briefly, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Jane, okay? Her mic is muted.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. So that was the day of the online faculty and student panels. And one of the great quotes that we heard that morning was, "Good teachers are great thieves." So that was repeated several times. We had some laughter about that, but again, great teachers learn from others and from peers and try to implement those great lessons in their study, especially for online. There was a lot of really good conversation about synchronous online classes here at UNCG. There's a few areas that are doing it a great deal, and some areas have never done it before. So the UTLC is going to put together some resources to kind of really talk more about, how to handle those classes and how to create those classes. So those resources are coming. We talked a lot about faculty presence in both panels, so both faculty and student panels. The faculty talked about the importance of being present and being engaged with their students, and the students took it a step further and talked about how they really need their faculty to help connect them to their peers. So that first week, those icebreakers that we all think that students don't want to do or don't like, they actually need that to help connect them to their peers. So hearing that different ways was really important to me. Looking at my notes, we talked a bit about rubrics. I know Jane wants to talk a bit more about that as well. Students talked about using rubrics as checklists, so they kind of go through it as a checklist to make sure they've got things done. But we quizzed them about, what about the grading and the feedback? And the online students on the panel really pushed us and said, it would be great if you would, when you're giving feedback using the rubric, to go past the standards, because the standards mean different things to the faculty versus the students. That's one thing that really kind of rang true with me, and I'm going to think differently when I'm grading this coming fall. We talked a bit about paying up front versus paying later, and that paying later is very costly in that online classes especially require a lot of preparation beforehand, a lot of work, having your peers look at your class, giving you feedback, tweaking, thinking about all the ways that people can get lost, and then as opposed to just putting it up there very quickly, maybe not thinking through all the steps, and then students getting lost and getting bombarded by email. So they talked very extensively about the need to put that energy in before the class starts. What was interesting as well is that the students talked about the syllabus. Some of our grad students said they do read the syllabus, which was nice to hear, and some of them said it was way too long and they don't read it. And then Will had this great quote about chasing documents, that you'll do an assignment and they'll refer to guidelines, and we have all these rubrics and checklists and things that they have to see, and that students are having to chase the documents through your online class. So again, thinking about streamlining that, either putting it all in one document or all in one place in your online class. And then my final comment for Monday morning was that Wade talked about, and it kind of rang true the whole week, is that you don't want to approach your online class thinking, how can I bring what I do face-to-face online? You really need to think about it from a different perspective, because you don't want to limit yourself and keep what the magic that online can bring to your class. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jane. I will scroll down so we can see your documents, if that's okay.
Yes,
okay,
great. I'll say one more thing about what you just said about Wade. I totally agree, but you know what? That's why TOPPS is so good, because, online is a very different culture than the face-to-face classroom, and we are so, both students and instructors, we are so ingrained in that culture that, I don't know about you, but it's very difficult to see beyond that until you've either been exposed to it as a student, or vicariously you see what other faculty are doing. So that's a good thing to remember. Find out what they're doing first, and then you can begin to imagine what's possible. Okay, from the faculty panel, I was interested in what Catherine Aldridge articulated, which was start by building online community among students. In other words, start with activities that foster and sorry, got a plural in there when I needed a singular. Let's hear for Google Docs. Start with student commonalities, and you can see Catherine's example there. Then what Kay has done beautifully in each of her courses, which is for each unit page or each week page, she sets them up the very same way, which really lowers the tech and the reading cognitive load. Then I won't repeat what Carrie Richardson said, and Wade Mackey. I loved that, because students will email you 5 times in one day if they don't hear from you. So he says he tells students that he will reply to an initial email inquiry within 48 hours, which I loved. Okay, and then the student feedback. What was interesting to me about the student feedback was that really is connected with how students feel connected to faculty. Not only do they need to know if they're getting it right, but it is part of the whole social connection that they have. And I know that they do a lot in the online environment because, you know, in the online environment, you do a lot of active learning. They do a lot of work on their own, which sometimes they don't do in the traditional culture of face-to-face, where the instructor is kind of lecturing and is giving it all to them. And all of a sudden, they're in this very different culture, and they feel kind of you know, hung out to dry. So the social and the active learning piece are the distance in the active learning piece can make them feel quite isolated, and it's a really good idea to make sure you give them that extra feedback. Now, having said that, with larger classes, that is a really tough row to hoe. The other thing is, you know, when working in groups, I was really interested because a few years ago we had a student panel at what was then called Power Up, and there were 4 people on the panel. They said, "We hate group work, don't do group work." And I was fascinated to hear that these students liked to do group work. Now, I thought were very smart in saying that they like to do small projects together online, like solving math problems. And I would say also probably case studies can be a really good idea as well. And also they made the point that doing group work, using a tool where the instructor can see who's doing what, so the students are held accountable by the instructor. And then you can look at some of these others. Oh, just one thing, and I've seen this face-to-face too. Students don't know what you mean in the rubric. The terminology, you know, like analyzes really well. Well, what does that mean? Breaking it down into what are the questions or what are the activities that they need to do to analyze, because they don't know what that means. They can't read the teacher's brain. So I think that's really important. And I will quit, and I would love to hear more. And I see that April Wright is, and Terry and Catherine are putting in things like mad, and that's great. So back to you, Amy.
So yes, I'm watching April type, like, because again, this is all fantastic stuff here. So does anyone want to share more ahas verbally? I mean, we would love to have it in the document because we want to make this resource available to everyone who could not come this week. But does anyone want to share some aha moments that they had from that Monday morning session?
I just want to say that I love this document. I love that you have things that I might not have, you know, written down, and that I have things that you might not have written down, and that later I'm going to be able to go back to this and have all of it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and I've done this in class too when we've had speakers, and so they kind of have like a group note sharing. So I wouldn't do it every day. It's kind of they can get kind of distracted, but yeah, I love the group notes, the kind of the crowdsourcing aspect of it. So yes, any other insights from Monday morning?
In terms of one of these comments that just got it added about Catherine's line about the what does the driving, the way that I remembered it was as a comment about technology. So it was, don't find a technology solution in advance and then try to figure out how to get it into your course. Know what your learning outcomes are and how you want to go in search of a technology to solve that teaching issue.
Ben. Any others? All right.
I want to second what Ben just said, because there are lots of tools out there that can solve a specific problem, but some of them will be better than others. So come at it from the point of view of what do you want your students to be able to learn to do, and then come talk to one of your ITCs or the UTLC, and we'll help you figure out the best, most efficient, easy tool to use to do that.
So if you're just joining us, a few of you just popped in, I'm putting in the chat a link to the document. So what you see here on the screen is a document that I'm sharing from my computer, but this is a Google Doc that I've allowed everybody to kind of jump in, and we're summarizing our thoughts from, well, so that we can all go back. Like I know that I'm going to be reading this and getting some ideas. So please feel free to add what those moments were that stuck with you, that you really made an impact, maybe made you think a little differently, or maybe you want to explore more this summer. So I'm going to move from another day. So we just gave you the book this week, so you read it. Some of us have already read it. I've read it a couple of times, right? Yeah.
No, I absolutely, yeah, and I haven't gotten through all of it twice, but I learn more each time I read it.
So when I first read Michelle's book last summer, what really struck me was how accessible it was. She's a cognitive psychologist, so I immediately thought I'm not going to be able to grasp this. She made it very accessible. And it was, as someone who's been doing online for a while, it was nice to kind of see a positive view of online. So there's a lot of negative things out there about online and what doesn't work, and she really showed the research that showed that there's a lot of things that work really well online. So that was really refreshing. So again, Literary Circles and Falls, if you want to read it with some friends, feel free to join me. We can discuss it. So I'm moving on to Tuesday, and we have a link up there. So there is more resources in that link than you'll ever have time to go through, but there's some great stuff there. So Michelle teaches a neuroscience class through the OLC, which is the Online Learning Consortium. I highly recommend it if you have time to take it. Lots of resources. She put some of the resources from that class in that link for us to see, so feel free to bounce through that if you've got some spare time this summer. But I want to go through some of the highlights of what stuck with me, and then again, Jane, I'll toss it back to you. So we've heard a lot of talk about cognitive load and how, we all have a certain amount of cognitive load, and that our attention kind of focuses how we use those cognitive resources. So if students are having to process lots of different steps to do an assignment, that taxes their cognitive load. So for instance, I teach public speaking online, so I have what I have in the LMS, and then I have them go to the publisher site to do different things. And all those things involve steps back and forth. So as a teacher, when I'm designing, I really need to think about minimizing those steps to kind of lessen that cognitive load, because I want them thinking about the content most of the time, not how to get to one site and come back. I also want to explain why they're doing what they're doing in both places. So she talked about the need for having a strong design to kind of limit that load. She also talked about the testing effect, and she goes into this in great detail in the book, but using lots of constant assessments so that students are bringing that information up back in their memory. Some of us don't use a lot of tests, so this was kind of, we had to digest this a little differently, but we always think of tests as a way to measure learning, but testing is also a good way to measure learning, measure how much they know and get them retrieving that memory and help building that practice. She also talked a bit about the spacing effect, which again, she also talks about in the book, about spacing how they learn over a period of time. So for instance, her example was, if a student sits down and studies for 4 hours, they don't get as much out of it as if they study over an hour 4 times. So if they break that up into chunks, they tend to process that easily or more easily. And then finally, as a comm person, I know April is also a communication person as well. Context, we know about context and how important that is and how it plays its role in memory. So how we're studying in that context tends to be how we retrieve that information later. So she suggested that, we keep our structure in our class, we keep it consistent, but really think about playing with that context when we're presenting that information. Can we vary it in any way? All right, so that's enough from me. I want to hear from you guys. Jane? Can you share what you learned?
Sure. I had read some of the articles that she quotes before as well. But one thing that struck me was when she made this statement, we know a lot how to build better recall in less study time, and I would put in retrieve in less study time. And then I would pop back up to my attention section, and we've talked a lot about lowering cognitive load from a technical point of view. She also mentioned we need to be sure that they've automatized basic knowledge, like, for instance, learning your multiplication tables, which I had to do in 3rd grade, and we had to be able to do them in so many seconds. So that's a very simplistic example. But if you have that basic knowledge, then you can go on and you can spend more time. You have more cognitive resources to work on a problem that's more difficult. But looking at those things, and multitasking, oh my goodness, yes, we all know about that. But if you can limit that, that'll help you diminish the time that it takes for you to learn. But also then using visuals, and then what April said about the testing effect, the spacing effect, and also interleaving, which means actually from the point of view of Robert Bork's work, means putting, learning A, then learning B, then kind of pulling back A and pulling back B, and maybe putting C in next, so that they're having to learn, it's like blocked time, instead of learning your tennis forehand and then your spike all at once, you're kind of doing everything at once and making progress little by little. Now, that can be very frustrating for students who are used to cramming for one piece like one chapter or something like that. But over the long run, you will learn more in less time, which is very just hit me between the eyes really clearly this time. It is harder for students in the beginning because they don't feel like they're making the progress that they usually do in the same amount of time. But it actually, they have shown that it really does work. And I'm going to pass it back to Amy.
In piggybacking on Jane a little bit, she talked about really kind of explaining to students why we're doing what we're doing, to help them kind of understand this process of how they're learning. And so not just the quizzing and the spacing and not just doing it in class, but mentioning to students and helping them with their practice. I see Joel is writing some good information here. Joel, do you want to talk a bit about what you're writing, or do you just want to focus on your writing?
Well, I'm just playing with Google Docs really, but I don't know whether I have quite a bit on what happened on Wednesday, so I'll be quiet for now.
Okay. Any other aha moments from Tuesday? We are talking to, oh, yes. Is that Mercedes?
This is Mercedes. My question or comment is about testing. Our students have to do a humongous amount of homework. For me, that's kind of the way to keep them in track. Like, for example, to master the grammar and master the vocabulary, they have a lot of homework. And I wonder, what you're talking about testing is also referring to that, right? It doesn't have for the students to be named quiz. Am I right, or what do you think?
Yes. Yes, so I think that anything that makes students kind of rehash and kind of retrieve that information and constantly, especially teaching Spanish, I mean, they can't forget the basics of the language. You're always keeping that in play when you're doing the testing. So I know that for your assignments, you're having them write and speak and do lots of different things. So I think testing is more of a broad term. So it's not actually could be a test, but you're making them recall that information constantly.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Although, if I understand the psychological benefits, one of the concerns would be a student who will always just look back to the textbook while completing a homework assignment, or in this case, always go to Google Translate or whatever as part of the solving. You're not getting the memory benefits there that you would if you tried to just from your own memory go through a test, no matter how good or bad that you did, and that'll help you identify the things that you need to focus your studying attention on in ways that just looking through a textbook over and over again and say, oh yeah, I remember that, oh yeah, I remember that, is sort of a crutch that students use to not engage in the more challenging work of grinding through attempts at actually remembering things.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
So, Mercedes, do you do any timed tests or assignments, so where they don't have time to look up and Google Translate, that would force them to kind of go through that process?
No, we have online. We have one midterm that is not proctored, so they can check on the textbook, and that's why the percentage is very low. And then we have a final exam that is very, very high. It's 40% of the grade, and the composition that is the same day of the final, that is 10%. And the reason why it's so high is because it's the only time we can have that proctored, just because of the money that they have to spend to pay for the proctor. The rest, we have quizzes, we have homework, but for all of them, no, we don't have time quizzes and homework. One thing about quizzes that have had time is because we want them to learn from them, from the wrong answers. So we allow them to sometimes to have multiple attempts. But I understand what Ben is saying, and I think it's a very good point too. So no, we don't have any time quizzes so far.
So maybe that's an avenue to explore. And I know that
Right.
I've been through your publisher software that there are assignments, but they're actually in the form of quizzes. But I believe your publisher software should allow you to add a timer so that if you wanted to make them in that kind of format and experiment with that, you should be able to do that.
Yes, I have seen that option. I don't do that either because I don't know, in foreign languages we work so much with anxiety, and we want to really lower the filter, the affective filter. So yeah, but I know what you say. Yes, I agree with you totally.
Okay. Yeah. Any other? Go ahead, Ben.
To me, those two things work nicely together. The sort of, can you quickly recall something in a timed environment, and Mercedes, what you're saying already is this multiple chances to go through the same. So it's not like it's a high stakes, you have to get through this quickly. It's like, see if you can do this. No, you weren't able to do it. Okay, go back and try and think through the things that you were having issues with, and come back and do it again, and see if you can have that quick recall for a second attempt or a third attempt or a fourth attempt or whatever you decide is helpful for them, but that it can be a way of encouraging them to go back to the things that they're struggling with in a formative way before they reach those bigger assignments.
That's true. You're right. I never thought about that. That's true. Thank you. It's a great idea.
Any other comments about Tuesday? Ben and I also had the opportunity to interview Michelle that afternoon for an upcoming podcast. So Ben is working on a new podcast series that's coming out in the fall, and so Michelle will be, I don't know where she is in the lineup, Ben, if you've decided that already, but she'll be one of the early episodes. So be looking for that. All right, so we're going to move on to Wednesday. And the focus here was on motivation and thinking. And April just asked me a really great question about this document. I'm going to keep this document open for probably another week, so if you guys want to add more insight to it next week, eventually I'll have to make it public. So if you want to just listen today and then go back and add some more stuff next week, that'll be great. And then we'll add this to the TOPPS website that we're creating for everyone to see. So if you have an aha moment, please come back and share that with us. So Wednesday, motivation and thinking. Let's see, I'm going to bounce through this because, again, you can read a lot of what I have here. And I'm watching everybody add stuff, which is fantastic, but also distracting, so I apologize. So she talked about, actually at the very beginning, she talked about that transfer of information. And we had some good discussion in the room about helping students transfer that information and the problems that we're all facing when it comes to keeping it in memory and then transferring that information to other scenarios. Again, she talked about the importance of presenting as many problems as possible to students to develop mastery. Again, this goes to the quizzing. It also goes to changing up the context for students. She recommended using lots of scenarios, lots of case studies, problem-based learning. So again, they have to use the information in different ways. But again, kind of hitting that testing effect as well. She talked a bit about the self-termination theory and the conditions that will help students stay motivated. So one was competence, so feeling good about what they know. Relatedness was another one, that social aspect of their own learning. And the autonomy, having that choice so they can choose. So having those three elements there. It definitely made me think a little differently about, for me personally, my group work that I have them do and kind of switching it up a little bit more, giving them some more choice there. She talked about some design solutions, and she gave, and I know Jane's got a much more thorough list than I do. I've got kind of big concepts here. Using assessments early and often, lots of low-stakes assignments, lots of feedback. So I don't know if anybody has used the feedback feature in the quizzes so that when students take a quiz in Canvas, not only do they know if it's right or wrong, but they can actually get some feedback. So maybe incorporate some of that feedback element as well. I know some publisher software, when they take quizzes, they get some of that feedback as well. But the importance of building in those routines, those consistent deadlines, because it puts fewer demands on their willpower and keeps them motivated. So again, if you have a deadline, week one, kind of keep that same structure each week so that they know I got to go in and get that done by that deadline. Jane, I really want you to go through your list because you have a more detailed list than I did.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to be brief as well. The point that thinking often gets crowded out by content, I think that's kind of how many in the country have done this traditionally. That is, we have to cover the content, and so we don't, we run out of time to do the actual thinking exercises, or we forget to include those, to design for that. Thinking actually, there are many different kinds of thinking. And also that, yes, it is context-specific and rarely transfers as well as we assume. What's interesting about that is I wonder how this works in a time when interdisciplinarity is being so strongly advocated. So there are issues there. I thought a lot about what Ian Beatty talked about in problem solving, and because I'll tell you, when I was coming up, I could do theoretical math just fine, but I couldn't do word problems worth a darn. And I think the reason is that it wasn't taught well. I honestly do, and it really resonated with me when Michelle was talking about focus on the underlying structure of the problem, you know, and then vary the context, vary the surface characteristics. And in her book, she talked about even physically, you know, putting one problem on top of another problem, kind of graphing it out so that you could see exactly what, how the structure was the same. And she gives some examples in her book. And I'm going to be doing some more reading on that. That was very interesting to me. Critical thinking, she's saying, is particularly challenging, and that it's a two-layer process, a when-to and a how-to. Then, just briefly, she gave some examples of simulations available online, and you can look more at Merlot, MERLOT.org if you don't know that website. It's a digital repository of free online learning objects. And then I've given you a couple of low-tech solutions that she gave us. That's thinking, motivation, the role of incentives. Do you remember Alfie Kohn and all of his writing about the importance of intrinsic motivation? And I was interested to hear Michelle talk about, okay, you can do intrinsic and extrinsic together. That's a good idea. And then DESI, which Amy talked about. And academic self-efficacy. If students see that their efforts are impactful, they'll persist. And that, I think, is another reason why the grouping works really well. Because if students appreciate one another, that really helps. Sometimes they won't trust a teacher, because the teacher is saying, oh, you're doing great, when really then slam, here comes the exam. But if a fellow student says, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, that I think can help. Willpower and ego depletion, that made me think about why I eat so many cookies at night. So kind of being careful of not having to make too many decisions and too much cognitive load in your day. And then mindset, if you don't know Carol Dweck's work, that's pretty interesting work, and you can look her up on YouTube. She's got a couple of very interesting YouTube clips. Game design. I've heard a lot of people talk about that, and I know Ben Peterson is interested in that. I'm beginning to be won over by the whole game design thing. And that's where the multiple testing and that kind of thing can come in, and where the branching, for instance, that you can do in Google Forms could come in. And then I've put a lot here in a design. I like the fact, don't just think about what you're going to cover and how you're going to build things up cognitively, but map out how to keep students motivated through the course. Foreground the why you're having students do what you're asking them to do. We don't do that enough. We need to do it over and over again, which is obnoxious for us, but students don't get, how does this apply to them? And that makes us also think about how we are developing these learning activities. Are these learning activities going to be useful to them when they get out in their professional lives or in their regular lives? So I think that's a really key thing. Then, the early and often, the build routines, you've heard about that. Linda Nielsen's Self-Regulated Learning book, it's not a big book, it's a little book, but it gives 75 metacognitive exercises that you can use at different times of the semester. It's very well written, very useful, very pragmatic. I don't know the Changeology book. I'm going to have to take a look at that. And then this whole thing that was mentioned by multiple faculty members in the session, and that is, how do you get students to persist and to make improvements over multiple drafts? Like, for instance, you give them, you tell them that, okay, you didn't improve, your APA format is not correct, please correct it. And then in the next draft, they hand in the same thing, and they haven't made any improvements. So what do you do about that? Well, I have some ideas about that, but that, I think, is a challenge that a lot of people face. And I'm going to quit.
Fantastic, Jane. Fantastic. So more ahas from Wednesday. I found myself Wednesday kind of would hear her speak and then immediately started thinking, how am I going to restructure something in my online class? So I started going down that trail. So what were you guys thinking when you heard her speak on Wednesday?
Well, Amy, I thought that the transferal thing was the most explosive idea that I encountered. Not so much that I planned. Actually, I've been doing asynchronous online stuff long enough that I had sort of developed answers to a lot of the questions, particularly to this transferal thing that you just, actually the only guidance I had was that a long time ago I heard somebody say that what was wrong with American education was there wasn't enough redundancy, and so I sort of applied that in, you know, in mass quantities. And what she was saying about transferal developing as you try to use the same strategic pieces over and over again, when you do that under different contexts constantly, well, that's where you learn this, you know, where you use transferal to master your subject. And it was very nice to get some reification for that idea, and also to have a much more expansive environment of a psychologically tested idea called transferal. And in applying it, I mean, not only does it work in classes, but I can see how it applies to some research that I've been doing. So I think it's a very productive thought, and something that I expect to get a lot of use out of.
Thank you, Joel. Any other ahas from Wednesday?
I agree with Jane about the why. I think it's very important to stress over and over and over the why. I think that's also an aha moment for me. Sometimes I get bored of saying the same thing. So, but yeah, that's my aha moment.
Thank you, Mercedes. Any other ahas from Wednesday? Lots of things to think about here. Okay, let me twist it a bit. So we had these morning sessions with lots of things to think about, and several of us went to afternoon sessions after that. Did anything did you bring things over from the morning that you took into the afternoon that made you think differently about your class or how you're going to teach online? While you're thinking of your example, I'll bring up my example. So I went to Jane's session on online group work, which is always a difficult one to put together. So after hearing Michelle speak and then going to the group work session with Jane, I found myself kind of connecting those pieces together about transference and the why. And I'm planning on I do a really big group project, which now after hearing all these thoughts, I'm now thinking I'm going to do several smaller group projects and constantly let them have more choice and keep explaining why they're doing the work that they're doing. Any other thoughts about Wednesday? Richard, are you trying to?
I sort of think that
I was just going to say it was real helpful to hear some opinions on that, and I was thinking about that too, how I need to create more benchmarks and break things down, because it just seems like I had an expectation that, you know, because grad students, and for the most part, they can do it without the benchmarks, but some of them really do need that. So I think I need to be a little bit more aware of that. So that was helpful.
Yeah. Me too. That really sunk in with me, because I have students do a group project that takes 6 to 7 weeks, and I found them kind of getting lost into the why they were doing it and the context, and I feel like I was trying to take on too much in one project, so I'm really going to step back and review these notes several times and think differently about that. Thanks to Michelle and from Jane's session.
Yeah, can I just say one thing? That's something that I'm not sure is much different than face-to-face.
True.
When you give a big group project, you know, except when you're in face-to-face, you can look at them in the eye and you can say, okay, how you doing? And you can give them class time and you can see how they're doing. But otherwise, you know, I'm not sure it's that different.
I actually found the face-to-face students, because I taught face-to-face this semester, actually wasted more time than the online students. The online students, when they logged on, they seemed much more efficient. So that was really surprising to me this last semester, but definitely want to think differently about it. April, you've raised your hand. Do you want to share something?
I forgot to take my mic or turn my mic on again. Amy, I just wanted to say, actually, you know, I feel like sometimes there is a place for a long-term group project, especially if, like, there's a pedagogical reason that you're doing that, and when we think about the workplace and how we're going to have to work with people long-term. And so I would say if there's some reason for your project, don't get rid of it. Just do some small group projects building up to it and doing that kind of thing rather than getting rid of something that might have a foundation that's useful.
I agree, but I do think, as you mentioned, there's a time and a place. So I teach freshmen, and they just seem to get lost in the details of the project. So I think if I made it smaller, especially if I had like smaller practice projects, like kind of a low stakes kind of a group project, that would, because I needed to go over more time, like how to be in a group and how to speak, give presentations as a group, and I just need to spend more time with that, and I need to shorten that project down. So, but yeah, I do agree that there's a time and a place for big group projects, but I don't think it fits well at a freshman level class that I was teaching.
I get that. I teach a lot of freshmen also.
Joel?
Well, I think that the best part of Jane's sessions for me was that she was telling me, well, you know, I have all this redundant stuff going on, but I'm not really stopping at the beginning of it and showing them how to do it. And that she says I should make a YouTube example of how to do this graphics thing, and I think that's right. I'm going to modify my actually several courses along that line that somehow I give them an example early on, fitting pieces of the puzzle together or something.
Thank you. That sounds great. Any other thoughts about Wednesday? All right, so we're going to keep working on this Google document, because if you're like me, I think I'm done and I step away and I realize I think of some more things. So if you want to spend the next 7 days or so kind of working on this, and then I'm looking at my calendar because I can't speak dates. So maybe the week of May the 21st, I can make it live so I can share this with other people. So again, feel free to add what we don't have here in the document or other thoughts that you gained from the session, and then I'll make this document available to others who were both there and were not able to join us this time. Any other thoughts or comments about TOPPS, things maybe we could do differently, things that worked, didn't work?
Amy, I just wanted to say that I've been to a lot of stuff here at the university and organized some stuff myself, nothing this big, but this was really, really well done in my humble opinion, and I feel that I have learned at least as much from all of the attendees as I did from Michelle. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to chat with people and learn from people.
I agree. I learned so much from everyone. I expected to learn from Michelle, but just hearing the questions that people were asking her and the problems, it was so wonderful just to hear that. So, yes. So, any other thoughts?
That goes back to the very first thing you shared and what we learned, which is the good instructors are great thieves. So having more people to steal from is always better.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So I'm going to stop sharing, but you all still have a link to, let's see, stop sharing, because what I want to do next is share the link. We have one more session for TOPPS, and that is a library session. And I want to give you the direct link to that. Ben's going to leave shortly to go set that up. But that is for the Zotero tool. If anyone's never used that, it is definitely worth learning. I have used that before. So I'm going to give you a link to our TOPPS page. And at the top it has the link to So if you're planning to join us for the library session, if you click that link, you can find the link at the top to the library session. Again, if you've never used Zotero, it's worth, Amy Hook is a great presenter of that tool to help you organize your research. And she will actually close out the TOPPS series for us. So she'll be our final one. Just remember, we are recording all the webinars so that if you want to go back and review them, including this one, you could definitely do that. And last chance for questions or comments.
I have a question about the Wednesday afternoon session. Did you record that session?
None of the afternoon sessions were recorded. I think for our next TOPPS that we need to add an online component so that if you can't attend all, I know how it's like to have 2 or more sessions that you want to go to and having to decide, so that we're going to capture that better, I think, next time. So, but we're asking all the speakers on Wednesday to give us the links to the resources that we can share that. So once the TOPPS website is created and completed, you can go there and see what they were looking at.
Thanks.
You're very welcome. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to see what you're going to add to the Google Doc. Again, give yourself a good 7 days to add to that or glean from that, and then I'll share that with everyone starting the week of May 21st. Thank you so much for coming. It's been great to hear from everybody. Thank you so much, Jane, for joining me.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to everybody, and have a great summer.